to the end of another busy day. You just saw 20, 30 patients, maybe more. Instead of heading home for dinner with your spouse or playing with your kids, you now begin your night job, charting. Charting is critical for patient care, billing, and medical legal liability, but it steals our focus from our patients, eats away at our time with our families, and keeps us up at night. The burden of always having another chart to complete drains all of us. Freed listens, prepares your notes, and writes patient instructions for you. Charting is done before your patient walks out of the room. Wait, because it gets better. Freed learns your style over time. It's AI, just like a human scribe would, except it will never quit on you. Freed is loved by 3,000 plus clinicians from every specialty. It's HIPAA compliant, takes 30 seconds to learn, and costs only $99 a month. You can try Freed for free right now by going to freed.ai, Freed.ai. Listeners of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring can use the code PGD50 for $50 off the first month. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Do you want to maximize the value of your points and miles on your credit card? Then stay tuned, and this is part 1 of 2. And this is a little more advanced. For the intro to points and miles, we had an episode that came out February 1st, 2024, called Jet, Set, Go, Points and Miles Doc on the Secrets of Smart Travel. So check that one out too. Welcome back to the podcast. We have a super special guest today. And actually, interesting story. I was with a couple of med school friends last night, one of whom did not know that I do this podcast. And when she heard that I was having this particular guest on, she was super excited because she already follows her. And she was like, she's like an internet celebrity. I can't believe that you're going to be having her on your show. So shout out to Kai, who got excited about my podcast. Thank you. And for Amy and Aparna, great seeing you guys last night. So we have Dr. Devon Gimbel, who is a double board certified physician and founder of and owner of Point Me to First Class. And that's a business that helps employed professionals, entrepreneurs, and business owners with high personal and or business expenses earn tons of credit card points to travel the world in comfort and luxury. She believes that your expenses are your greatest asset. Interesting contradiction, but I love what you're doing there. And if you know how to leverage them. And you can find her at pointmetofirstclass.com. So Dr. Gimbel, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited for this conversation, and I just really appreciate the invitation to be here.
Let's get started. So my first question is cashback or miles? And my assumption has been miles just because cashback seems so basic. Like if they're going to give you cashback, like you don't have to jump through any hoops, like it's easy to do. So if you're getting miles, because it's harder to manage, there's got to be more value you can extract from it. Is that a correct or incorrect assumption?
I think it's almost entirely correct. So I am not someone who believes in all or nothing. There's one thing that's all good or all bad. And in this conversation around credit cards, I think there are, like you mentioned, sort of if you want to use credit cards to get some type of reward, meaning that anytime you put, an expense on a credit card, you're going to be given something back in exchange for using that card from that credit card issuer. And like you said, the two kind of main categories of rewards cards that folks get to choose from are, do I want a cashback card that gives me just a designated, straight, predictable amount of cash back for any expense I put on this card? Or do I want to go in the direction of a credit card that's going to reward me instead with a sort of different form of currency, meaning either points that you can use, airline miles that you can use, hotel points that you can use. And I do think for some people, going with the cashback approach is better for them. Even though I obviously love points and miles and I benefit from them tremendously, and I think more people could benefit from them than know about them, I actually don't think everyone should have them. I actually do think that cashback cards can be really advantageous for some people. And I think those people, first of all, if you don't really love to travel or you don't want to learn how to use points or miles specifically to travel, then I think you would be better with a cashback card. I also think if you're someone who really, really just values simplicity and predictability, cashback cards are great. You know exactly what you're going to get. You don't need to have a bunch of them. I mean, you could have one really solid cashback earning card and benefit from that, right? So I'm not someone who thinks that cashback cards are dumb or that you shouldn't use them. Not at all. I think for the right person, points or miles earning cards can benefit you exponentially more than a cashback earning card. And I still think there are some people for whom a cashback card is a much better fit.
Like my wife, who is not interested in playing the game. For her, cashback would make the most sense because you're going to get a benefit and you don't have to worry about.
Absolutely. And I think, exactly. And I think that I'm guilty of this too. I'm certainly not separating myself from this. I think for those of us who love points and miles, who love, like you said, this game and do know how to maximize it and benefit from it, for those of us who enjoy talking about this, we love saying, oh, I was able to book this flight and it saved me this much money. I think one of the things that we never want to lose in this conversation is that at their heart, points and miles, they are not cash. Yes, we can absolutely learn, how to exchange them for things that do have cash value, but they are not cash. And so I think that is one of the biggest arguments or the biggest strengths of a cashback card over a points or miles earning card is that cash is the strongest, most flexible, most liquid, form of currency that these types of cards offer. And so I think that is a relative strength of cashback cards over points or miles. And again, that flip side is if you're somebody who enjoys kind of learning about how to put puzzles together and you understand the potential opportunity of that, then by all means, jump into points and miles because it can be enormously beneficial. But that's why I love having this conversation and actually acknowledging, no, I don't actually think that no matter what, points and miles credit cards are inherently always superior to cash back cards. I think it's more about understanding first, what are you personally looking to get, out of your credit cards and where would you stand to benefit the most?
So you can extract more value out of it if you're willing to put in the work.
Absolutely. Yes.
One of the things that we did, because we had an episode a while ago on the same topic, and one of the things we did is we got an Amazon card for our Amazon purchases. And so because with Amazon, you get 5 times points with every Amazon. So it automatically, we don't have to do anything. And so we're getting basically 5% off because you get 5 times cash back. It's automated and it's great. So that particular thing we're doing cash back, but everything else we're doing miles. So let's get into the miles. Actually, before we get into the miles, personal question, how many cards do you have?
All right. I feel like I should provide a lot of context before I answer this question, because one of the things that I worry about when we have conversations about points and miles, especially if folks in the audience are kind of new to this topic, or if they have an introductory sort of level of understanding of this, I think that sometimes what can happen is that when you have someone who's very enthusiastic about points and miles like me come on, I think sometimes we can create this misimpression that there's only 2 ways to do this, that either you are all the way at one extreme, like I might be, or you're doing points and miles, quote, wrong, or you're just not really taking advantage of it. And I never want to give that impression. And I do think that context is important because not only have I been doing this for 10 years now, so I have a long time to build up to this point. This is not what I call it a credit card portfolio. This is not what my credit card portfolio looked like, my first year of doing this. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge this is now what I do full time for a business, right? So I also have probably more cards than the average person, even one who is very enthusiastic about this hobby might have. But I will tell you now, but that's the thing. I would hate for someone to hear my answer and think, oh my gosh, like that sounds so ridiculous to me that I would never want to go, to that level. Therefore, I shouldn't do this at all. And that's what I want to avoid. But I will tell you, and I actually looked this up this morning because this number does change over time. So I went in and I looked at all my different accounts because I've, multiple different cards from multiple different issuers. So I personally, right now, today, I have 25 open credit card accounts. And that's a mix of personal credit cards, business credit cards, again, across different issuers. My husband, who I would classify as a willing, but maybe not particularly enthusiastic participant in this whole thing, which is not uncommon to see when you have like partnerships, is that there tends to be the person who's the driver in terms of being really excited about points and miles. And then the partner who says, I'm not really sure what this is. I'm glad you love it. Like, I'll kind of go along with you, or just do this yourself, right? So my husband is very supportive, but I would not at all characterize him as someone who's equally interested in points and miles as me. And so he has far fewer cards than I have. He only has 17. So for him, it's also a mix. It's also a mix of personal and business cards because he's self-employed. And that actually is one of the things that first got me into this entire hobby was my husband is also a physician. We went through med school together. We couples matched into our residencies. We came out of training just a year apart. And he very quickly, after coming out of training, decided he wanted to be self-employed. And, when we were initially kind of tackling that process of how do we get his medical practice up and running, there were a lot of expenses associated with that. And it was one of the things that became very, very apparent to me immediately that if we were strategic about picking credit cards and using credit cards, that we could use those business expenses to earn points and benefit from them extraordinarily. And so that was really part, of our joint credit card journey. So he does also have a lot of cards, and he has cards that we very specifically chose for him a lot around his business, to benefit that. And so, as a family, yeah, we've got a fair number of credit cards between the two of us.
For the audience, because we had an episode on this previously, we changed the way we do things in our house. I probably have like five or six cards. So, and we're doing things much better. The 80-20 rule. You have to know really 20% of the information in order to do it 80% correctly. So, you're at 100% because this is what you do for a living, but like really you just have to learn some basics in order to really ramp up how well you're managing and how well you're taking advantage.
Yeah. And I think you are such an amazing example of that you are in that wonderful, and I think the majority of where folks fall, where that is that amazing in-between space where you don't have just one credit card, which is what I think a lot of us have this pattern where if we don't know about cashback cards or if we don't know about different points earning cards and how a combination can be really powerful, I think it is very common for most people to have their one reliable credit card, and that's the thing they use anytime they want to use a credit card. Looking at that kind of trajectory where you started, it sounds like, to learn a little bit more about this and saw, there's probably some opportunity here where if we brought in just a few other credit cards for very specific reasons, we could actually experience a much larger impact than just holding one card. And I think that's exactly correct. What you're going to get out of 5 cards, I think is going to be vastly superior to what you were getting out of one card. And the difference between what you get out of 5 cards and what I get out of 25 cards, again, chances are I might be getting a bit more out of them just purely because, again, this is my area of just extreme enthusiasm, but I don't think it is that same amount of difference, and I think so many people can do really, really well with 4 or 5 really, really solid points earning cards. Again, you do not need to get to the place where I am, unless it's something that is interesting and exciting and fun for you.
Doctors like us have demanding schedules, so growing our portfolios shouldn't be another burden. And the last thing we want when we take off our scrubs is a call from a tenant about an overflowing toilet. So Equity Multiple brings us streamlined access to vetted real estate investments that work for us, even when we're off the clock. And only 5% make the cut. Once we invest, a team of professionals goes to work to maximize our returns. With a minimum investment of just $5,000, diversify outside the stock market with cash flowing CRE like multifamily, industrial self-storage, and more. Welcome to modern real estate investing. Visit equitymultiple.com to learn more. That's equitymultiple.com. And probably, you learn a little more and then you get a little more comfortable and you get a little better at it and it kind of ramps up from there or not. And this is something that I'm struggling with right now because I originally, when I moved to New York, I started shopping at Costco and they were on Amex at the time. Now they switched to Visa. So I needed an Amex card and that became like my go-to card for a lot of stuff. And I got like the fancy Amex card and it was Delta because Delta flies out of New York and that was the one that I got. But now the way that we're doing it, we bank with Chase. And so all of our cards are Chase. And we do that because then so we have a short-term rental property that has its card. My wife's teaches cooking classes, so her business has its card. My podcasting business has it. And all these cards are Chase so that we can transfer points to one another and then use it for purchases. But now I've got this Delta Amex card that's just hanging out that I use for my work business expenses. I'm a partner in a very large practice. So we send our expenses to the accountant. That's how we get some deductions. And it's just an easy way. If I charge everything on the same card, it's just an easy way for me to keep track of those expenses. And I use the Amex because it's kind of like, there aren't that many charges of the leftover card. So I'm still going to use it. Or should I? Like, this is what I'm struggling with. And what you said earlier about your husband has 17 cards, you have 27 cards. Like, at some point, you're going to, so this is all pointing to the same question. You just accumulate those cards in a closet somewhere, some of which may have fees and some which may not. And as you're growing the ones that you use versus the ones that you don't use, or do you end up closing them?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. I think where other people, again, may not ever get to the same exact scenario or experience I have, but what I do think is very common for folks is sort of the experience that you're relating, that, you know, you may have one or two credit cards that at a specific time in your life were really useful and really valuable. We see this a lot with medical professionals, especially because we do tend to move around so much for our education that, you know, when you were in medical school or you were in residency, maybe you lived in a big city, as a lot of medical institutions tend to be, that happened to be a hub for one specific airline. And so it made sense, you know, during a certain period of your life to maybe have a Delta card because you were based in Atlanta, or to have a United card because you were based, you know, at a United hub. And so anytime you flew, it was nice to have a, you know, a credit card for that purpose and get a couple benefits from it. And then, you know, as life changes or as your spending changes or just what you want from a credit card changes, you may find that now the card you want to pull for in your wallet every time, it's not the same one that it was 5 years or 10 years ago. So I think that this is a scenario that so many people encounter, maybe for different reasons. And I have a couple of different thoughts about it. So first of all, I do think, especially if you are interested in points and miles, that you may over time accumulate, again, a higher number of credit cards than other people do, because I think most of us will apply for specific cards for a specific reason in time. Maybe I really want to focus, like you said, on earning a lot of Chase points because I have a trip that I want to use Chase points for. But maybe 3 years down the line, the next trip I really want to save for is one where American Express points are going to be way more useful for me. So then maybe I have some Amex cards for that, and I'm not using the Chase cards quite as much. So I do think no matter what, it's always useful once a year to evaluate just what are all the credit cards I have right now. Again, whether it's 1 card, 3 cards, 25 cards, it is helpful to sit down and just say, wait a minute, what are all of my open accounts? And what are the cards that I am actually regularly using, I anticipate I want to continue regularly using? And for the cards that you identify that are no longer really serving a purpose for you, maybe you don't think you're going to use them again for at least the next year or two or many years. Or maybe there's a card that does have a really high annual fee, because we see that on especially the sort of top or premium level credit cards. And again, maybe that was a card that was definitely worth it for you when you opened it up, but it doesn't really make sense for you to pay $695 every single year to have this card in your wallet that maybe you're not going to continue to use. And so, first of all, I think it is very smart and responsible to at least once a year run a full evaluation on your cards and just ask yourself, which of any of these are continuing to benefit from, am I continuing to benefit from, and which of these maybe don't I want to keep open? But the one thing that I would say around your question is that I very, very, very rarely outright will cancel a credit card. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So I'll tell you why I don't do this and then what you can do instead, because most people aren't aware that this is an option. So let's take that Delta credit card, for example. Do you happen to know the annual fee on that card that you have that you're kind of considering?
Yeah, it's a premium card. I bought it. That's where most of my expenses were going. So it's like $500 or $600 a year.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the perfect example, right? Where most of us probably don't want to continue to have a card in our wallet that we are going to have to pay $500 or $600 a year for, again, unless we're getting tons of benefit out of it. And so one of the things that I think so many people don't understand that's really, really important, there's so many things that we weren't taught that we should have been taught, especially around money and finances. And one of them is just your credit score. What impacts your credit score, so that you can understand if you take certain actions, then you can predict, is this going to actually benefit my credit score or hurt it? And a lot of what impacts your credit score is counterintuitive, which is why I think it's really important to talk about this in the context of what you need to know before you close a credit card. There are actually 5 main factors that impact your credit score, but the 2 that I think are relevant here is that the second most important factor that impacts your credit score is something called a credit utilization ratio. This accounts for 30% of your credit score. And all this means is that at any given time, if you look at all the credit that's available to you, say you have 3 credit cards, you look at what's the credit limit on all three of those cards combined, let's just pretend it's $10,000. Let's say at any given time, you're using maybe $3,000 of that credit, right? So if you're using $3,000 out of the $10,000 available to you, your credit utilization ratio is 30%, right? That's like how much of your credit at any given time you're using. Now, what happens is that when you close down a credit card, you lose whatever the credit line on that credit card was in terms of the total amount of credit extended to you, which means that even if you don't change anything about your spending patterns, naturally, because you've lost a portion of your available credit, your credit utilization ratio is going to go up, right? Because maybe instead of having $10,000 of credit available to you, now you have $5,000 of credit. And so just that change, where again, you're not spending any more money, you're not buying things now that you didn't buy before, but you've lost some of your credit, so your credit utilization ratio has gone up. That accounts for 30% of your score, and that can have a significantly negative impact on your credit score just by closing your account.
That's wild, because you're like, I'm going to go through my credit cards and I'm just going to cancel the ones that I don't use because that's the responsible thing.
That is what I'm saying. It's so counterintuitive, right? And this is what's really wild about the credit utilization ratio is that it doesn't matter, because you mentioned that you have a lot of Chase cards.
That'd be amazing.
No, exactly.
27 cards and you're using probably...
No, I usually use 2% or less of all of my credit because I do have a lot of credit available to me. And that is so wild, right? Because most people hear, okay, is it more responsible to have 2 credit cards or 25? Most of us would say 2, of course, right? Not necessarily.
Credit card.
Yes.
You'd be like, let's give them 27.
No, exactly right. No, I would pass out. But that's what I'm saying is that it's so counterintuitive, right? And then the other thing that's really important also that is a little bit less impactful in your credit score, but is relevant to this question of should I keep an account open or not, is that one of the other factors of your credit score is the overall length of your credit accounts, meaning that let's say you've had 2 credit cards, but they've both been open for 20 years. That is a really, really beneficial aspect to your credit score, because what it says is that you are quote unquote responsible with credit, right? You've had accounts open for a very, very long time and you've treated them well. And so banks like to see folks who have, again, this is sort of an average score if you have multiple different credit cards, but the longer your credit accounts have been open on average, the better, right? So what happens then, especially for you, if this is a credit card that you have had open for a quote unquote long time, like one of your oldest credit cards, that is a card that you really want to be very, very careful about deciding if you cancel it, because if you cancel it, the age of that credit card, that no longer is going to impact and help your credit score. So especially if you now, let's say, like you said, now you have 5 cards, maybe you've opened up 3 of those cards that you now use a lot in the last 2 years, that is going to have a quote unquote like young credit age, right? Compared to a card you've had open for 15 or 20 years. For people, again, where if you have a credit card, especially if it's been open for a long time, or especially if its credit line is a significant portion of the overall credit that's extended to you, that is a card that I would tell you, please don't cancel if you can avoid it. But here's the good news. It doesn't mean then that you're stuck paying a $500 or $600 annual fee year after year, because we don't want to do that, right? So here's the option that most people don't think they have. Most people think, if I'm not using the card, I should cancel it. It's responsible, right? And it's easier for us. There's a third option, which is a really great option for so many people. And it's something called a product change. And what that means is that most of the major US banks or major credit card issuers, what they will allow you to do is you can call them up and you can say, okay, hey, like I have this specific card. I'm not getting as much use out of it as I used to. Can I actually trade it in for a different credit card that you also issue? So for your example, since yours is a Delta card, Amex actually issues 3 separate Delta credit cards. And Amex will allow you to product change or trade your Delta card for a different one. And so usually what you want to do instead of outright canceling a card is trade or product change it for a no annual fee version of that card. And the benefit of that is that that actual account, like your account number, stays the same. So you maintain the age of that credit card account, you maintain the credit limit that's available to you on that card account. So it protects all of those parts of your credit score that card is contributing to, but it gives you the option to then have a different version of a card that isn't going to be expensive for you. And so kind of coming back to the first part of your question, yeah, there's a lot of cards I have that I'm not actively using on a regular basis. And maybe they're ones that I've done this process where I've traded them in for low or no annual fee cards. I don't keep them in a closet. I keep them in a safe. And so I know where they are. I know where, I can find them. And I know that, my 5-year-old, if she's going to open a drawer and grab a credit card, and she probably knows how to use Amazon better than I do, and then like all this stuff shows up at your house. But yeah, I think it is really important to not feel like you have to continue holding cards that are no longer useful for you, but understand that there's this amazing alternative to canceling them outright.
So then if there was a card that had an amazing welcome bonus that you signed up for, you got the welcome bonus, you started using it, and then after a year or two, you're like, you know what, you might close that card. But one of our cards that we started, it goes back a while and your credit has increased and you've got a history there. Those you wouldn't. Okay, I think that's a pretty straightforward strategy, and it makes a lot of sense at the same time being countering. I know what to do with my Amex card, and what I'll probably end up doing is getting another Chase card for those expenses, because we just never fly Delta. We're in this weird situation where my wife is Swiss. We see her family twice a year. She is a Swiss devotee. She loves flying Swiss. We fly, even though Delta flies to Switzerland, we fly on Swiss all the time. And so we're always flying to the same place, and it makes more sense for us to accumulate those miles on Chase.
Yeah. And I just want to, go ahead. Yeah. And I was going to say, because I think this actually is a really important point that a lot of people don't realize, is that not only, like you said, are you not actually flying Delta that often, but I think one of the pieces of this equation that it really helps people to understand is that in terms of what specific credit cards can do for you, it can be very different, because that Delta credit card, unless you're actually booking paid flights on Delta, pretty much any other expense you put on that card, what Delta's going to do is say, okay, for every dollar you spend on this card, we're going to give you 1 Delta Sky Mile in your Delta account that you can then use for travel later on, right? So again, let's say you're using that card for business expenses. You put $100,000 of expenses on that card over a year. You're likely going to earn 100,000 Delta Sky Miles. Well, if you go to Delta, you realize pretty quickly that 100,000 Delta Sky Miles doesn't get you very far. But there are other credit cards where those same exact expenses, you probably have an opportunity to earn a lot more points using a different credit card. For example, like one of the Chase business cards, the Chase Inc. Business Unlimited card, for your business expenses, no matter what category of expense that is, like whether it's medical equipment, whether it's software, whether it's your EHR, any of that stuff, you get to earn 1.5 Chase points for every single dollar you spend. So again, instead of earning 100,000 Delta miles for $100,000 of expenses, you can earn 150,000 Chase points for the same amount of expenses. And so there are always going to be opportunities where you can actually earn a higher amount of points if you're strategic about which card you're going to use for which expenses. And those Chase points almost always are going to be significantly more valuable and useful than Delta miles are. So I agree with you. It can just making one little change can have a really big impact.
This is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, coming out soon. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee, and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.